To bylo neskutečně kvalitné, musím uznať. Takita Hunger. Kokino člověk, koko.
here's Tulsi Gabbard. So Tulsi Gabbard has this to say about the persecution, the political prosecution of Donald Trump and his political organization. No, we're no fans of Donald Trump at this uh, show at all. But what we try to remind people is the same thing they did to Tulsi, because she went against the establishment and the war machine. As she was serving as an officer in those foreign wars, those illegal foreign wars, as she was serving in them, they called her a Russian. Who did that? The former First Lady, Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, said she was a Russian asset, as she's a currently serving officer in our military. So she's calling out the political persecution of Donald Trump's political movement and Donald Trump. So let's listen to it. And the reason why it's important to speak out against this is because they would do this to anybody who's outside the establishment. Anybody the donor class hates, that's what they'll now criminalize them and try to throw them in jail. That's what they would have did to Bernie Sanders. They already Russiagated Bernie Sanders. They did Russiagate to Trump. They did it to Bernie Sanders. And then if he would have gained power, they would have criminalized him. And he knows it, which is why he tucked his tail and gets people back into the Democratic Party. Let's hear what Tulsi has to say.
Jordan, this is yet another example of how far President Joe Biden's politicized Department of Justice is willing to go to try to destroy his main political opponent as a presidential election is going on. This foundational purpose of what the Biden administration is doing is really the thing that should be most concerning to everyone. As you can see, all of these indictments, count after count after count, being thrown at former President Donald Trump is clearly an effort to divert his focus away from the campaign and towards fighting on multiple fronts in these lawsuits, and to completely drain him and his campaign of resources so that they can't focus on actually campaigning and trying to win this election. The founders envisioned that our country would be a country of laws, not of men. And what we're seeing here, most concerning as it relates to the First Amendment, but you take all of these different attacks and indictments in whole, what we're seeing is a politicized Department of Justice that has disqualified itself from being able to fulfill the awesome responsibility that they're entrusted with, because they are using it, first of all, to go after their political opponents, namely Donald Trump and his supporters, and also using the Department of Justice to protect the Democrat elite, namely President Joe Biden, by extension, Hunter Biden. So we're seeing how this politicized Department of Justice is being used to achieve both of those purposes, both of which harm the American people's interests, the interests of our country and our democracy.
Well said, and it still stings that she endorsed Demented Joe, but well said. And it's amazing there aren't more, well, it's not amazing. Of course there aren't more people saying that. So Craig, would you want to say something?
No, I mean, right on. Exactly, 100%. But I'm just curious if it's going to stick. They keep trying to throw this stuff at him. Now they're going with the indictments over January 6th. I think it's backfiring. I've seen polls out there that most people don't care. They look at it as a political attack. And it's just going to lift up Trump even more. And, that's the curious part. The part that's hit my brain is like, are they doing this on purpose to lift Donald Trump up? Or do they really just don't want him to run whatsoever?
No, they really don't want him to run. And that's what this is. And they don't know what else to do, and they don't know how to stop it from elevating him. Just like the Pied Piper theory. They thought that was they got it. We got Trump, and now they think they're doing it again. But it's gonna back. And Glenn Greenwald said that they're playing with fire, and it is, and it looks like it probably will backfire on them, because half the country sees exactly what this is. At least half the country, right? I mean, let's remember the Democrats are only about 26% of the voting electorate. So same thing with the Republicans.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. I was screaming at my old roommate on the phone yesterday about this, because he just buys it.
Yeah.
And he's like, he goes, do you think he's gonna be convicted? And I said, yes, probably, because they filed this in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
And so it wouldn't be hard to find a jury full of Democrats who are willing to convict him over January 6th, even though it's ridiculous. Same thing in Florida. The different thing in Florida is it'll be a little harder to convict him on that stupid case in Florida. And the same thing in New York, it might be easier again because it's Democratic jury, but then it's such a stupid weak case.
Yeah.
All the Trump's defense attorney would have to do is just go play CNN videos of CNN talking about how weak of a case it is.
The one that really put him in a little bit of hot water is the one he admitted that he didn't declassify them and whatnot. That's the one I think they're going to
That's
get
the
him
Florida
on.
one. You think they're going to get him on that?
The one that he took the paper or
Yeah.
the classified information.
Right.
They have the recording of
He's
him.
the guy who can declassify everything, though.
But he said they weren't declassified.
Yeah, I know.
So that's
That's right.
the area I think they're going to get him on, or they're going to be able to hold that over his head. The January 6th stuff, I don't see it happening. The Stormy Daniels thing, I don't see it happening. That's the one he's got to watch out for. And nonetheless, like you said, he's allowed to declassify anything. And what he's declassified, or what he was talking about not going to war, being pushed to war,
Yes.
is the crazy part
So-
that people aren't paying attention to.
So, yeah, the declassified documents, he found out that he was being lied to about war. And that's the real scandal. But of course, they want to make it that Trump's committing a crime because he wouldn't warmonger. Come see our live shows. We're going to be in Chicago, Rosemont, Las Vegas, Salt Lake City.
Jak no Boba napustil. Bubák. What?
Can you tell me what's going on? Just put your hands behind your back before you end up on the ground. No, I'm not breaking anyone's foot.
Dang, you can't help but feel bad for the guy. He clearly was just on his way to work, and the officer didn't explain why he was being detained until over a minute into their interaction. No matter what, Alton County, Georgia resident Tyler Canaris did not deserve what happened to him next. I will spare you from watching the rest of that, as it's really tough to hear Canaris' screams and cries as Deputy Michael McMaster continues his efforts to arrest him and shouts expletives at him. Throughout the interaction, Canaris maintains that he was just going to work, but Deputy McMaster is clearly having none of that.
You're under arrest for obstruction, at least. How? You don't want to fucking listen. Put your hand behind your back. That's simple. Then I told you you're going to end up on the ground. You still didn't do that. Then your ass ended up on the ground. Didn't it?
I wasn't trying to.
You wasn't trying to. How old are you?
Please.
How old are you?
I'm 29.
You're older than me. Act like a man.
I've been trying to get to work. I'm seriously not trying to do anything, please.
As Canaris continues to beg for his release, McMaster keeps berating him for allegedly resisting arrest as he searches through the contents of his backpack.
When the cops say put your hand behind your back, you do it.
I don't know what I did wrong.
I was trying to explain to you, but you want to keep pulling away. So now you're under arrest for obstruction.
You can call my dad, please.
How old are you? 29? I'm not calling your dad.
What?
I'm not calling your dad. You're 29.
Later on, as Canaris can be heard yelping while in the squad car, another officer on the scene jokes about what happened.
That's like, so like, all right, let's pull up, see maybe he took off running or something. Yeah. I'll just see legs. Son of a, I just got 920 shows thing. I tried keying up, it wouldn't go out. I was like, yeah, dude.
Then, McMaster confirms that Canaris fit the description of the individual who was seen trying to break into other people's cars.
Male backpack, right? Dark clothing. I mean, it matches too, see? I'm willing to bet he's on.
I'm sorry, that's all they had to go on? That's the vaguest description. There could be hundreds of people who match that on any given day. So, under that logic, any man walking in and around the neighborhood could be deemed reasonably suspicious enough to be manhandled like that? That doesn't seem right at all. As if all of that wasn't ridiculous enough, McMaster somehow seems to question and want validation for his decision to use blunt force against Canaris.
Just want to make sure it's him. Because he didn't really have. Just in case he hit his head pretty good. Fair.
Maybe, just maybe, Deputy McMaster could have undertaken a little more effort before hurling Canaris to the ground. Like I said, that incredibly ambiguous description he went off of just doesn't seem reasonable. Not without extenuating circumstances at least. In any event, the officers engage in more laughter and joke about the matter.
This is how we're going to start the day off, huh? I didn't stretch before any of this shit, man.
I just saw legs go up. I'm like, I'll record.
I can't fall in Tim Tam.
Through his diligent search of Canaris' belongings, the only items found that could perhaps be used in a carjacking, at least according to McMaster's reaction upon finding them, were a pair of gloves. However, without any other substantiating evidence, the officers still assumed that Canaris was the person of interest.
I don't think he ever made it into a car, did he? That we know of. Yeah, he was trying. It is him. Yeah, criminal attempt.
Around 11 minutes into the encounter, the members of the fire department roll up, seemingly to inspect the damage and treat the injuries on Canaris' body.
Oh, okay.
You got any much?
Right?
My wife likes to live in car.
I don't think he actually got into a car. I dropped him on his head right there. I got boo-boos too, so I'm okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna need to interject here and point out the irony of a man who claims to have boo-boos after accusing another of acting like a child because he was crying after his head was slammed onto the ground. Of the incident, Paulding County Sheriff Gary Golich said in part, at approximately 6 a.m. on March 4th, 2022, Deputy Michael McMaster of the Paulding County Sheriff's Office responded to a report of a suspicious person who was wearing a hoodie and a backpack, attempting to break into a vehicle in the Evans Mills subdivision. A short time later, Deputy McMaster arrived at the location and observed Tyler Lee Canaris, white male, 30 years old approximately, walking along the roadside at the entrance to the subdivision. Mr. Canaris, who was wearing a hoodie and a backpack, appeared to match the description of the suspect that was provided by dispatch. For whatever reason, the dashcam footage of this incident was only just released, almost a year after the incident actually occurred. Nevertheless, the video has blown up on social media, and many are calling for action against McMaster. And it's clear that Canaris is not going to let justice go unserved because he's already suited up with attorneys. They said that his injuries were extensive on top of the misdemeanor for obstruction. Many reactions across social media have slammed McMaster and the Paulding County Sheriff's Office for filing such charges because Canaris' confusion was reasonable under the circumstances and should not have been considered obstruction or led to the excessive force, of course. Tyler suffered a left clavicle fracture and currently has pins in his shoulder that will be with him for the rest of his life, attorney Sean Williams said. Williams further said
what the video doesn't show is that Paulding County knew all of it. They've had this video that you guys saw last week, they've had it almost a year.
Canaris' right hand and skull were fractured. He also ruptured an eardrum, suffered a concussion, and was diagnosed with a traumatic brain injury. At least some of these injuries were notable at the scene because of a blood spot that McMaster is later heard pointing out to the firefighters and seen spraying something onto it.
Yeah, I think that's a blood spot.
Canaris claims that his mental health has also declined since the incident. In a press conference with his lawyers, he said,
after it happened, I had trouble walking to work and not thinking that there was a
The medical treatment required apparently left Canaris with $75,000 worth of medical bills. All of that just because he was walking to work and matched the description of being a man wearing dark clothes and having a backpack. Another attorney, Taurus Butterfield, commented,
There was no probable cause to stop Tyler. There was nothing to suggest that Tyler committed any crime whatsoever. So this was an unlawful arrest.
Butterfield called for the charge against Canaris to be dismissed immediately. His attorneys and the public are wondering why Paulding County sat on this footage for so long. Canaris' attorneys also confirmed that it was determined that he was not the suspect in the alleged break-ins. They said that they're planning to file a civil suit against the county on their client's behalf. There was so much public outcry after the video was released that Paulding County enlisted the help of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation to review the arrest and use of force by McMaster. Once the video came out, we made the decision to get the Georgia Bureau of Investigation involved and let them look at it and get their unbiased third-party opinion on what took place, and if there were any criminal actions that took place in that incident, Paulding County Sheriff Sergeant Ashley Hinson said. When asked by the local news if deputies are trained to use McMaster's technique to subdue someone, Hinson said, "We're aware of the optics of this incident. Because we've turned the case over to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, and there is pending potential civil litigation in the case, we're not going to elaborate on that portion of the case." As of Friday, February 17th, 2023, McMaster, who's been with the sheriff's office for 9 years, has been put on desk duty, while the GBI's review is underway. In a video, while admittedly filmed from behind a filter, which she explained is because she has cancer, shorter hair now, and wanted to use an older picture instead, Tyler's mom, Gina Davis, said,
"I want to thank everyone all around the world for being a voice for my son, Tyler. Thank you for seeing and saying. Hopefully one day we can make it."
If you enjoyed this video about seeking justice for someone who is the victim of an officer abusing his power, check out this video where a young college athlete blows zeros on a breathalyzer, but is still arrested for suspicion of operating while intoxicated.
Počkaj. Počkaj, tam je. Tu niekde chodí Gornicius. Pán Štôverka nie je spokojný. Nie je spokojný ten Gargamel, že som ho odniesol. Tvrdá rán si to dala vedieť. Pán Štolverka. Pán Štolverka. Nebuďte pervitín. Nebuďte pervitín. Magic Legends. To bolo kľúčová vecička, kľúčová. No. Poďme to rozprúdiť. Takže ono to bude, táto liga bude asi jedna, no nie liga, ale táto zmena chieftaina, a toto kľúčové brnenie, ktoré jednoznačne budeme chcieť spojasniť, to bude presne ono. Toto kľúčové brnenie, ktoré nám dá 858 k životu. Je neuveriteľná bomba. Ale tým pádom nebudeme potrebovať veci, ktoré budú mať život. To bude bomba. Bude kľúčová bomba. Kľúčový machiavelizmus. Ako to branie bude kľúčové. To bude kľúčové. To je... Okolo tohto postavíme celú vec. Na toto. Toto. Kytáva tribe. Uvidíme, koľko bude stať. Teda dúfam, že nebude moc drahé. Nevyzerá, že by bolo moc drahé, ale nie je také másne. A v prípade, že sa mýlim, v prípade, že bude drahé, tak sa samozrejme nič nedieje. Budeme používať nejaké iné dovtedy. Podľa mňa to brnenie, bude stať veľa peniazí, si myslím. Myslím, že maximálna suma, najdrahšie bude stať jednu divajnu. Čo sa bude dať zohnať? Nevidím to nikdy nebude ľahšie ako jedna divajna, podľa mňa. Hovorím, aké bude, svet sa nezrúti. Budem používať niečo iné, ale toto je kľúč. Toto je kľúč. Taký tá hunger je kľúč. To bude neskutočne veľa života. Neskutočné bubany. Toto je kľúč. Toto je kľúč. Ale že bude veľmi drahé, uvidíme veľmi. Nie, že dá, veľmi ťažké to získať, takže uvidíme. Uvidíme. Toto branie sa nezoženiem. To bude aj ako sáčka. S tým branie sa musí teda rozločiť. To bude aj ako sáčka. A že to ani nezaženie podľa všetkého. Čo sa dajú byť? Čo sa dajú byť? No. No. No.
Is it? You live around here, bud? No. Where you live at? Down the road by Pineville. Okay. Do you have any form of identification on you? What's your name? Robert Jones. Robert Jones? Mind if I see you on the track? No, that's not the problem right now. What's your address? I don't have an address. I'm at the hotel. We're working on the houses and stuff like that. Roofing? My brother. Alright. Oh. What it is, we got an escapee. Oh. Where from? Prison. Prison? Yeah. Hey, this Carl. Subject wear glasses? Nothing but glasses. Can you find out what a white male on the tracks at Gilly Williams? What about? Take the glove off. Any tattoos or anything? Look over. No. No, he's clean. How old is your guy? You're how old? He's been born in 56. 58. Any kind of details you can give me, huh? What color eyes you got?
Well, kind of turquoise blue.
Turquoise blue? Want to give me some more?
Oh, my little brother, man.
Do I? No, it's not. Yeah. Yeah. Short hair. My guy's got skin cut hair. He's got a beard, goatee like. How old is that picture? Yeah, I know. I got the same thing. You can't see shit on it. What kind of scar? Okay. All right. Let me just verify. He said his brother stayed at the motel. Let me verify that. If so, I'll just cut him loose. All right. Thanks. You know the bad thing about it? You're matching up to it. Yeah. Where are you staying at?
That Titus Steel or Titus Inn? Titus Inn, little.
Where's that at?
We just got into town about a week ago. And he dropped me off the job. I was dropped about 12 miles away.
Where'd he drop you off at?
Up there on that road by this construction window up there, out. And he dropped me off. And he'll be back at the hotel in probably 10 minutes, 15 minutes.
Who y'all work for?
It's
I know. What's the name of the company?
Fields Brooklyn.
Okay. Did you go through a broad patch or something?
Well, yeah, ripping. I always rip this short, cut my scratching up on,
That's why your knees are all cut up? Or y'all got pads?
Huh?
Y'all wear pads?
hot, but had to rub your back and leg.
Where are you from?
But we're originally from Dallas, Texas.
I mean, that's where y'all stay out of Dallas, Texas? What's your name again? Put yourself in my position.
Well, yeah, but I'm not.
I know, I'm not telling you to get some, hey, you wouldn't believe what them guys do. I mean, they got years and years to think about how they're gonna do it. Now, when I crossed the tracks down there, I saw you running, I said, well, How lucky can I be?
No.
How far you got a jog to?
Hopefully on these tracks.
You gonna hit?
Huh?
Oh, you don't know where you're at?
I'm at ball.
No, how about you don't know where you're at as far as how far away you are from Palmer? I'm trying to think where you're gonna get out at.
Well,
Procter Gamble.
right?
Right, you're gonna be right there at Procter Gamble.
Walmart and all that.
That's where's y'all's motel at?
Okay, what do you think now? Like I said, fuel always drive. Okay, Walmart's right there, go right to Walmart, and there's a road, is it 165?
Right.
165 that goes south, and we're about 2 blocks, 3 blocks.
About 4.
Little old tiny hotel, I think it's Queens, but it's family owned.
Little tiny hotel.
Yeah, you know, like motel deal, partnership. And there's, we got a camper, and we were trying to get into the camper place, but we didn't get into the camper place. There's a camper place between Pineville, and what's the next town?
Alexander?
No, Alexander's the other way.
All Powell, Tioga.
There's a little, you drive down the road down, there's a place for, campers and stuff. That's where we usually stay before you get in there. I promise you, I'm not going to stay in this case.
You'd have done wrong by now. You know that yourself. You'd have done wrong by now.
Well, if you can't verify me, I'll be in.
Did you see anybody or anything?
There's some kids up there playing.
That's all you saw?
Yeah. Don't that see the blue your siren? There's a siren, and then some kids were screaming, some little kids playing on the track. And,
I probably told them to get off of them.
Oh, did you?
Well,
Can I jog on them? 'Cause this is
I don't care
It's the
personally.
only way I know how to get back.
Don't get run over by a train.
There isn't any. That's why I picked it.
I'm sure you can hear him way in advance
Yeah, but that's why they can arrest it, right?
for a train.
They go down this
Oh,
road.
yeah.
Oh, shit. Yeah, I saw that rough and I thought, hell, I can jog on this.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah, they'll come. Not as much as our other track. Other track about every
Thank you,
hour.
sir. I'm sorry to have to hold you up.
Hey, no, I'm just doing my job,
I
man.
know you are.
But, yeah, just be careful. You'll probably get stopped again, okay? Don't be alarmed by it. More alarmed, yeah.
Okay, you'll be on till, well, this is your,
I'll be on until we find this on gun.
well, we have auxiliary protected.
Where at?
Now,
Oh, okay.
possum is what they call it.
Yeah,
He's 70 years old and he's been doing it since 63.
still enjoys it. Yeah.
But, if somebody else talks to me, then I'll
I mean, they're gonna go through the same spiel and everything with
they
you.
can call you.
But, yeah, I mean, don't be alarmed by it. Don't be upset about it. You know, they'll just stop you for a minute, check you out and everything. But if you do jog again in the future, carry some ID with you.
See, I don't, I'm sorry. When I was in the military, we never carried our ID
Yeah.
on base and stuff.
On base is different.
Yeah.
You know, they assure you if you can cross on, you got something. But out here, you're in civilian life, you know.
Were you in the military?
No, I wasn't.
I'm retired Army.
But, yeah, in the future, if you're gonna jog again, that way, I mean, if you get run over by a train, I know who you are. I don't have to start second guessing who he is, you
Can
know.
you write down his phone number, his cell phone number, so I can answer the call?
Just call, you got a cell phone with you?
No, hell, I don't have a cell phone or anything.
Just call 911 is all you gotta do. They'll get a hold of us.
All right.
That's our quick line
You
there.
have a good day, now.
Be careful, buddy.
Thank you.
All right.
Richard Lee McNair is one of America's all-time greatest prison escape artists. His daring 2006 escape from the intimidating Federal Correction Complex just south of Pollock, Louisiana, was the first from a high-security federal prison in 13 years, and there hasn't been one since. The foreword of a book written about McNair's exploits stated that he was the only man ever to have broken out of a local jail, a state penitentiary, and a federal penitentiary. So what was it that made this man so hard to keep locked up? And just how did he pull off his daring escapes? Originally jailed for murder in 1988, McNair has been referred to as a double murderer and a textbook unsavory character. This view is questionable, however, when making a closer study of his personality and behaviour. Things such as this are rarely as black and white as they seem on the surface, and the man has even been hailed as a folk hero of sorts, for his consistent defiance of authority and apparent adherence to a personal moral code, having never robbed a person or a home despite the time he spent on the run totaling some years. The crime that put Nair in prison to begin with was not his first, but it was by far the most serious he ever committed. He'd been attempting to burgle an agricultural facility in North Dakota, nearby to his station at Minot Air Force Base, where he was a sergeant. It's unclear why a professional military man would want to commit an act of burglary. It would appear in McNair's case that he had a history of petty crime, and perhaps that compulsion still continued despite paradoxically choosing a career of order and discipline. Disturbed from his intended plan during the heist by two men, the 29-year-old McNair fired his gun, killing one and seriously wounding the other, who ultimately survived. So he was never a double murderer, as some have stated. When he was brought in for questioning by police, it seems he admitted to the act, handing over the weapon used without protest. Richard McNair was initially held in custody at the local police station in Minot. Not much is known about his first successful attempt at ditching his captors, other than that it happened very soon after his being brought in. Unfortunately for McNair, his initial escape didn't last more than a few hours, and he soon found himself back in a jail cell, this time handcuffed to a chair with 3 detectives patrolling the corridors nearby and checking in on him. Undeterred, the resourceful Houdini managed to pull a lip balm, that's a chapstick for American viewers, out of his pocket and used it to lubricate his wrists so that he could squeeze his hands free. Back on the street with Minot's finest in hot pursuit, McNair found himself on the rooftop of a 3-story building. Determined not to surrender and thinking fast, he leapt from the roof into a nearby tree. The branches broke, dumping the fugitive unceremoniously to the ground, where he was incapacitated and easily apprehended once more by the police. After a short stay in hospital, where he was no doubt cuffed to the bed and not allowed any lip balm, McNair was moved to the much more secure Ward County Jail. In February of 1988, after only a very brief stay, it was discovered that he'd been working away at the mortar between the concrete breeze blocks which comprised his cell wall. Apparently he'd already managed to get 2 of them loose without anyone noticing, and had hidden a bedsheet behind them. Eventually McNair would be sentenced to 2 life sentences for murder and for attempted murder, and another 30 years for attempted robbery. The next chapter in McNair's story is how he prison hopped his way across the United States, although this time not by actually breaking out. It seems that he would assess each facility for weak points, and if there were none to be found, he'd find other means to engineer his transfer somewhere else. Richard McNair was initially jailed at the North Dakota State Penitentiary in Bismarck. He adapted himself to prison life for the first 3 years, no doubt with its similarities to Air Force Base life, until in October of 1992 he would attempt and succeed in his first escape from a state-level facility. Accompanied by 2 fellow inmates, McNair crawled through one of the prison building's ventilation systems, beginning in one of the education rooms where the reformed McNair was involved in crime prevention programs for local teenagers. The air duct opened out onto a rooftop which the men traversed, dropping into a vehicle parking area. The duration of successfully avoiding recapture for each of the escaped inmates was respectively several hours for the first, several days for the second, and a total of 10 months for McNair himself. Richard McNair was necessarily a master of disguise, growing out and dyeing his hair blonde, growing a moustache or beard, changing his appearance any way he could to avoid recapture. He was captured continually on CCTV cameras, in gas stations and convenience stores, but never identified until later when investigators would piece together his journey across the country. In July of 1993, McNair would finally be rearrested in Grand Island, Nebraska, some 500 miles south of the facility he had broken out of, after attempting to break into a car dealership. Realizing they had a real problem case on their hands, and relieved to have back their latest and most embarrassing escapee, North Dakota Department of Corrections arranged to have him moved 1 state east to Minnesota's Oak Park Heights Correctional Facility, a level 5 maximum security prison. McNair spent several years here, and it said he eventually realized he wouldn't be able to break out. Perhaps that's where the system should have left him, to pay off his debt to society, but McNair had other plans. He participated in the sit-down protest at the prison, which saw him removed from Oak Park Heights all the way to Florence High State Prison in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains in Colombia. Again, he realized that escape would be unlikely at this location, and so he arranged for a transfer to United States Penitentiary Pollock, 1,000 miles away to the southeast in Louisiana. Likely due to his good behavior, despite the obvious jailbreak from the penitentiary in Bismarck and participation in the sit-down protest in Minnesota, McNair's request was approved. Maximum security USP Pollock would be the scene of McNair's greatest escape, and probably one of the most daring prison escapes ever undertaken. Although he was a known prison break artist and would no doubt have been watched extra closely by Pollock's guards for the first part of his stay, McNair is said to have been different to most typical prisoners. He looked more like an outdoor pursuits enthusiast than a hardened career convict. He was well-spoken, didn't smoke or drink, he had no piercings or tattoos. He kept in shape at the prison gym and was often seen running in the yard. Richard McNair woke up at approximately 6 a.m., went for a jog, and then headed to the canteen of his cell block for breakfast, his typical routine. Just after 7 a.m., he was in his designated work area, where his present daily task was the sorting of old mail sacks. Now, McNair had been planning his escape since the mailbag sorting job had come around. The bags, which couldn't immediately be repaired and reused, were being loaded onto forklift pallets and shrink-wrapped before being taken for storage in another part of the prison complex. What he learned next, completely by chance, was the thing that sparked McNair's determination to make his move soon. The assistant factory manager was mouthing off about needing the bags to be moved ASAP, and that inferred that they wouldn't be staying overnight in a staging area that would probably be locked, but instead moved directly to a warehouse outside the prison perimeter. McNair knew he hadn't long to act, a week at most, but his window of opportunity had arrived. This is the thing about someone like Richard McNair. He was well prepared and resourceful, but also an opportunist. He was continually reading books in the prison library about outdoor skills and bushcraft, and subscribed to several magazines too. He was caching supplies in his work area for his breakout long before he even heard about the pallets destined for the warehouse. The first thing he had to do was make sure he could work alone, to avoid arousing the suspicion of fellow inmates. This was achieved by the magic combination of making himself difficult to work with, and the fortuitous bonus offered at that time for men who went to work in new mailbag assembly. Within a few days, McNair was working alone. He had to be bold again, and lucky, because there were CCTV cameras everywhere. In his own words, you'd have been amazed at how open the area was. He built a frame from metal tubes secured with zip ties, placed it onto a pallet, and buried it in mailbags before shrink-wrapping the whole thing. He placed some of his supplies inside, and the most critical ones he taped to his body beneath his clothing, so that if he had to make a run for it, he'd have those at least. The last part of his plan was to report the readiness of the pallets to the other workers, and that the supervisor wanted them on the next delivery. He was on his way to medical, he told them. Doubling back to his work area without being seen, McNair stowed himself inside the cramped escape pod, sealing the entry hole with a piece of cardboard he'd covered with a mail sack to look just like part of the pile. His legs were drawn up against his chest in a fetal position. His arms were tightly pressed around the sides of his body, and his chin was resting on his knees. He breathed through a cardboard snorkel which went down and out the bottom of the pallet. This is how he would spend the next few crucial hours. After the fact, McNair recounted the tale to Canadian journalist and author Byron Christopher, and described the feeling the moment his pallet was lifted from the warehouse floor for the first time. It was exciting as hell. The adrenaline rush was so intense. Everything slowed down and my senses went into overdrive. Despite the initial excitement, things were off to a slow start, as the warehouse worker responsible for moving his pallet didn't seem in any particular hurry. She left him on the loading dock outside in the hot Louisiana sunshine for what must have seemed like an eternity. Entombed within the shrink-wrapped pallet of dusty old sacks, McNair's ordeal heightened. He said to Christopher, The inside of the pod felt like a furnace. Sweat rolled off me. My head was swimming in the fog. I was afraid I would pass out. My fears, every noise amplified. He thought back to his military training. Distract the mind from the situation, yet remain focused on the mission. The mission was freedom, and that freedom was close at hand. The distinctive clatter of an automated gate sliding aside told Richard McNair that he had reached the perimeter fence. There were 2 of these gates to pass through, and in between the final and most scrutinous guard. In a maximum security prison, as you might expect, everything is treated with suspicion, especially goods out. McNair heard the sound of the second automated gate rolling aside, but with no way to see out. For all he knew, he was heading back inside to be locked in a trailer awaiting closer inspection. Perhaps due to the rush put on the work by the impatient supervisor, or some other reason, he was soon moving again, and in the right direction. McNair recounted that the first thing which told him he was outside as opposed to back inside was the sound of a nearby vehicle horn. Vehicles were an extremely rare sight inside the perimeter fence of a maximum security prison. He was on his way to the storage warehouse outside the fence, albeit still on prison grounds. Soon his pallet came to rest, and the noises outside diminished. He knew he was on short time, however, as there were several scheduled head counts in the prison each day, with occasional random counts. If one of these counts took place and a prisoner was found absent, the whole place would be on high alert until that man was located, especially if that man were a renowned prison break artist. Cutting his way out of his hiding place, he was delighted to find himself in an open warehouse. No locked doors, nothing. He calmly began walking southwards, deliberate in his decision not to run for obvious reasons. McNair told Christian, "The senses are so acute, no way to describe it. Everything is magnified, smell, vision, hearing. It's as if you can sense with the skin." He had made the transition from prisoner to fugitive. Soon he made it to the relative safety of a wooded area, but he still had to make his way around a large construction site where a new medium security prison wing was to be. He was delayed several times by idling construction workers, fearing that the slightest movement might give the game away. Once past the danger, he dropped to his hands and knees and crawled about through the undergrowth in a rough figure-of-8 pattern. This was a well-known technique for thwarting the hounds the prison staff might well deploy to track down an escapee. He also made a couple of laps of a small nearby pond. This guy wasn't messing about. The deception complete, Richard McNair emerged from the trees at the east-west running Air Base Road, the end of prison property and the beginning of public. He recalled seeing a water tower with the word Pollock written on the side some distance to his left, and it's easy to spot this tower on Google Maps today to get an idea of exactly where his route crossed the main road. On the other side of the road, he climbed over a small wire fence, but as he did so, a passing motorist glanced his way. It was almost certain she would report something like this so close to a maximum security prison. What bad fortune. He was half a mile distant now from the nearest prison guard tower, and once again in the relative safety of the trees. The next obstacle in his way was a 10-foot-high deer fence skirting the perimeter of a hunting reserve. He followed the fence west without attempting to climb it. He had carefully pored over maps of the local area whilst planning his escape, and he probably knew that the game reserve on the other side would be relatively wild country, and possibly difficult to traverse on foot. Instead, by heading west, he would intersect with the north-south running railroad, which would allow him to make great time with minimal chance of being spotted again. Still with no idea if the motorist had reported him, or if his absence had been noticed back at the prison, McNair made his way south along the railroad in the direction of Alexandria, a sizable city. There are several points where minor roads intersect the rails, and it was at one of these he hit a sizable snag. Police Officer Carl Bordelon. The officer had, by sheer chance, been driving across the railroad crossing as McNair approached, running along the tracks. Prison staff had alerted police that they'd lost a prisoner earlier that day, but they also stressed they weren't certain that he'd left the premises. It's highly likely they thought this impossible, and much more likely that he was just hiding within the prison somewhere. They had provided a description and an old photograph which Bordelon later said had looked nothing like the man he briefly apprehended. Their interaction was captured on Bordelon's patrol car's dashcam and is available to view in full on YouTube. Link in the description box below. The exchange lasted 10 minutes. Bordelon asks McNair, "Do you live around here? And do you have any ID on you? And what's your name?" McNair, thinking fast, remembers the name of one of the suburbs of Alexandria, Pineville, and says that's where he's staying. He gives a false name, Robert Jones, and then asks, "Was I not supposed to be on the tracks?" McNair still doesn't know for a fact that the authorities are onto him yet, but he knows it's possible. Bordelon responds, "That's not the problem right now," and continues to try to pin down McNair or Robert Jones to an address. McNair spins a tale that he's from out of town, helping his brother with some roofing work. He swigs from a small bottle of water, which no doubt bolsters the illusion he's just out for some exercise. Bordelon smokes a cigarette. At this point, the officer lets McNair know there's been a report of an escapee from the local prison. McNair looks away suddenly, possibly a subconscious gesture to conceal his alarm, then turns back and exclaims, "There's a prison here?" One can imagine the adrenaline coursing through his system as he attempts to get through the officer's questions convincingly. The next few minutes, Bordelon is on the radio trying to get a better description of the man he's looking for, while McNair acts nonchalant. Bordelon and the woman on the other end of the radio talk about how bad the photograph of McNair they have been given by the prison is, no doubt giving his confidence a boost. Finishing his radio call, the cop says to McNair, "You know the bad thing? You're matching up to him." No doubt a gut-wrenching moment. Again, McNair turns away suddenly before coming back with a jokey answer. "Well, that sucks, doesn't it?" The cop...
Čo je, Lukáč? Čo sa deje? Tatiana relaxuje?
A Tatiana dovezla práve domov, sú na tých vyšetreniach. Pripravujeme sa.
Jak to bude?
Myslíš, že finišujem?
Pochybujem.
Aj, bol som po tých vyšetreniach, hovorím, že to je v poriadku a že ráno mám prísť o 7.
Budeš len rukač bez kostka.
Ale to je celkom slušný finish, keď si to tak zoberieš. Ideme si kúknúť Eugenia Korda. Vyzerá ako šmár. Ideme si kúknúť Eugenia Korda a zapneme si popri tom jeden pašatel. Kúkneme si ako dva šmarci, jeden pašatel. Ideme na tom. Je čas?
Ja sa nemám rád, pretože ničí ducha Slovenska.
Počujem si?
Ako štve proti tej Ukrajine. To mi na ňom najviac vadí. Ja si viem predstaviť, že prežijem ešte 4 roky, ak sa ich dožijem jeho vlády.
Prečítaj si tisíce exkluzívnych článkov, získaj skvelé benefity a podpor správy, na ktorých záleží. Staň sa členom Startida Premium klubu ešte dnes. Naším dnešným hostom je redaktor časopisu Týždeň, pán Eugen Korda. Dobrý deň, vítajte.
Dobrý.
Pán Korda, vy ste po dovolenke. Volebná kampaň beží, vy ste tých kampaní zažili veľa. Je táto niečím špecifická?
No, špecifická je tým, že je nová. A tým, že asi sa kormidlo dejí na Slovensku obráti. A tá samotná kampaň zatiaľ je, som povedal, taká nevýrazná. Robert sa tú kampaň vedie už 4 roky, takže u neho sa nedá predpokladať, že najbližšie niečo zásadné zmenia ako tú kampaň osudňuje. No a nemali sme tu ešte Fiatky, tak v tom je iná tá kampaň. A ešte iná v tom, že tie demokratické strany sú úplne nevýrazné. Ako keby kampaň ani nerobili. Esko kampaň ako keby nerobila.
Dostaneme sa k tomu, ale keď ste načrtli tie Fiatky, bavíme sa o teda nejakom volebnom nápade Igora Matoviča, ale dopadlo to tak typicky Matovičovsky, že má nejaký nápad, ale už od začiatku bol s tým problém. Vieme, že tie Fiatky on nechce dať do výdajov na volebnú kampaň, lebo hovorí, že teda to po voľbách to strane ostane a potom teda nejakým spôsobom bude žrebovať. No a pri tom ich zapisovaní mal padnúť úplatok. Čo si myslíte, že by Igor Matovič robil, keby toto nejaká iná strana takto sa im to podarilo?
No to nie je dobrá otázka, že to je jasné, čo by robil. Teda dobrá otázka. To by rozpútal šialené orgie, ohovárania, tlačovky, že čo to robia, ako podmázajú všetci. No a v jeho prípade to neplatí samozrejme, aj keď treba povedať, že ona si za to nemôže, že nejaký človek z nejakej agentúry, ktorý to tam išiel prihlasovať, sa dá ten úplatok. Ani to ešte nie je isté, ale asi je to pravdepodobné. Takže Igor Matovič tvrdí, že už sa nevyšetruje a zase klamal. A keď sa rozpýtali, že odkiaľ má tú informáciu, tak nejaký novinár to vraj povedal. Môžem povedať, že ja som to určite nepovedal.
Keď si zoberiete to, že on potom chcete nejakým čudesným spôsobom vlastne fiatky rozdávať, ale tie pravidlá tej súťaže sa dokonca môžu meniť, takže na konci alebo deň po voľbách môže tú súťaž úplne zrušiť. Čo vám to vyplýva? Čo chce on potom nejakým záhadným spôsobom? Bude to tiež nejaká atomovka, že komu dá tie fiatky?
Pozrite sa, že to je celý Matovič. Vy si určite pamätáte, keď vyhlásil tú súťaž kvôli tomu covidu, čo bola v televízii, čo bežala. Áno?
Očkovacia lotéria.
No to je jak to dopadlo. Minúta tam milióny eur na úplne bez akéhokoľvek výsledku, ale navyše tie pravidlá boli tak blbo nastavené, že tá pani, ktorá vyhrala, asi dodnes žiadne peniaze nedostala. No tak to bude aj s týmito Matovičovými fiatkami. Čo sa s nimi stane, neviem. Ja si myslím, že časom skončia v šrote. Áno. A dobre by bolo, keby Matovič skončil mimo parlamentu.
Tak má už to 7% kvórum, myslíte si?
Nemá ešte.
Teraz nie, predtým nie, ale teraz áno.
Kedy teraz?
Teraz, lebo je v koalícii.
Ja, takže kvórum má tak, ale 7% ešte nemá.
Áno, no tak pohybuje sa zhruba okolo tejto hranice, čiže to bude tesné. No on ide do volieb s tým heslom, že my vás teda mafii nepredáme a že tie fiatky sú tiež, teda boli symbolom boja proti mafii, čo zase tiež ľudia, ktorí sa tomu rozumejú, povedali, že zase niektorí mafiáni boli zastrelení.
Áno, redaktorka z denníka to napísala podrobne, dala si s tým tú robotu. No tak Matovič je klamár, no tak on vymyslí nejakú vec a nejakú atomovku a tá atomovka potom zasvietí polku Slovenska, ale samozrejme aj jeho. Ja mu prajem, aby tie fiatky ostali proste účasť v parlamente.
Keď hovoríte o tom klamaní, tak Jožo Pročko dal teraz taký status, respektíve on povedal, že to nie je jeho, kde teda si mal podávať ruku pán Uhrík s pánom Šimečkom. Potom povedal, že on teda to len prezdielal, takže využívajú už aj takéto veci, také, čo sme zvyknutí možno na tej druhej.
Akože využíva, však Pročko to využíva. Áno, Pročko využil tú kombináciu šéfa na progresívneho Slovenska a fašistu a potom namiesto toho, aby sa nejako ospravedlnil alebo čo, tak začal obájať. Ale to je celý Jožo Pročko. On je, ja by som povedal, že dosť bezcharakterný človek. Ja som ho osobne zažil, Joža Pročka, v čase, keď naši hokejisti vyhrali, myslím, to zlatú medailu, on tu vítal na námestí Slovenského národného povstania a tam tí ľudia čakali asi 5 alebo 6 hodín, než prídu tí hokejisti. A on, musím povedať, dokázal tých ľudí udržiavať v takom bode, že boli furt nažávení na ten príchod. On je v tomto fakt výbor.
Takže to dobre moderoval.
Dobre to moderoval všetko. A ja som tam, vtedy som robil v televízii, no a som tam behal s kamerou a on ma zbadal a začal vykrikovať pred tými ľuďmi, tam bolo kopu nacionalistov, že tu ten Korda z tej novej, ten protislovenský živel. Tak tí ľudia začali mi nadávať. Tak som išiel za ním dozadu a hovoril, čo to robíš? Bože, že to bola taká sranda. No a to bola taká sranda tam. Fašistom, ale sranda to nebola.
Hradské vyhlásenie.
Ďalšie zásadné vyhlásenie mali teda ďalšie. Prvé možno mala strana Demokrati, ľudia, mysleli ste si, že oni odstupujú z volieb, keď ste boli na tej tlačovke?
Ja som na tej tlačovke nebol. Nie, že by som nechcel, ale nemohol som tam ísť. A tak Čakal som nejaké zásadné vyhlásenia, ale ja som nečakal teda, že odstúpia, lebo poznám tie pomery v tej strane trošku.
A prečo? Prečo ste to neočakávali?
Lebo vedel som, že oni sa nechystajú to urobiť od rôznych ľudí, len som nevedel, že zorganizujú takúto smiešnú tlačovú konferenciu. Ale ja tú novú líderku, pani Letanovskú, mám strašne rád. To je jeden senzačný človek, výborný lekár, ale na tej tlačovke jeden vedľa druhého trápni, ako sa dopracovali podpory a ako vlastne útočili na PSK. Však ja PSK voliť teda nebudem, asi nie, ale bolo to také úbohé. A aj som sa chystal, že pani Letanovskej zavolám, preto som si povedal, že to nemá zmysel. Ona to asi teraz bude vidieť.
Čím to je podľa vás, že sa tie tri subjekty, ktoré mali nejakú ambíciu spájať, teda demokrati, modrí od Mikuláša Dzurindu a od Pavla Macka a Žolta Šimona. Prečo sa tieto tri prúdy vlastne nespojili? Vy s Pavlom Mackom robíte pravidelne reláciu?
Čo si zobral oko Vorvika? Prečo nevytiahol silný pik kartusa?
Daj mi jednu výhru dať a potom si dám kartusa.
A tak ju nedáš, s kartusom by si ju dal.
Ktorí sú demokrati.
S kartusom nedám výhru.
Ja, že nie. Nedávno si dal 2 v ráde.
Prestaň.
Vždy každého podvede.
Dal som výhry len preto, lebo jeden sa odpojil v 2. minúte a druhý sa odpojil v 10.
Vlastne porazili Večera, tak nerozpustil toto skupenie tých strán, ktoré ho porazilo, ale...
Čiže po tejto hre bude kartus.
Zdániš nejakú výhru teraz za to.
Takéto animozity...
Dvaja voci v jednom týmu.
Dohodnúť sa, no tak s demokratmi dohodnúť sa ťažko, veď to sú... Oni sa môžu tváriť teraz hoci ako, ale to sú vlastne bývalí ľudia. Ona celý čas Matovičovi držali celé roky, celé mesiace palce a proste a oni čakajú, že proste Macko a tí ako im letia do naučia, to je nemožné. Je to škoda, je to na škodu. Mimochodom, v týždni, ja si tu urobím takú reklamu, lebo vás to veľa ľudí, vidím veľmi zaujímavý rozhovor s Petrom Zajancom, ktorý práve o tomto hovorí, ale z hľadiska takej histórie. Fakt je to zaujímavý rozhovor.
Ja si myslím, že niečo som videl. On tam hovoril, že napríklad pán minister Šimko, že bol človek bez lojality, alebo to bol nejaký...
To je starý.
OK, a poďme na toho Šimka, lebo to je taká zásadná vec týchto dní, kedy vlastne celé policajné vedenie dalo si ultimátum, nazvime to tak, že teda ak neodstúpi Šimko, tak odstúpia oni. Bolo to podľa vás správne, alebo patríte k tým novinárom alebo komentátorom, ktorí to kritizovali, že policajti si už dovolili príliš?
Ja keď som čítal nejaký komentár v denníku N, mimochodom môj obľúbený denník, kde hovorili, že Hamaran panikári alebo niečo také, tak som sa smial, lebo ja Hamarana nepoznám dobre, ale poznám. Tak a čo k tomu povedať? No, Hamaran nevydieral Šimka. Hamaran povedal, že ak sa to nezmení, to znamená, že ak je minister, tak odídu oni. A pán minister aj dnes ukazuje, že nebol človekom na správnom mieste, pretože dnes hovorí, že však to Hamaran aj tak blafoval. Ale Hamaran neblafoval. Hamaran bol vyšiel a s ním aj ďalších, ja neviem koľko, 9 či 10 funkcionárov. Takže podľa mňa Hamaran urobil dobre to, čo urobil. Mnohí moji známi hovoria, že to jeden policajt si nemôže dovoliť. Ale jeden minister vnútra by mal vedieť, naviac ak je to len overený minister vnútra, že kde sú jeho hranice, čo on o tom, čo rozpráva, čo vypisoval. Takže on sa mal starať o to, aby tu voľby prebehli v poriadku. A o to sa možno stará, možno nie, to sa už nedozvie.
Ono sa ukázalo, že v tých kľúčových kauzách on nie je vôbec dobre zorientovaný. Takže je to chyba úsudku pani prezidentky a pána Odora, že...
Ono by... Tak chyba. Oni asi nepoznali dobre jeho minulosť, áno, ale ten, čo im odporúčal, lebo ja neverím tomu, že pani prezidentka s pánom Odorom povedali, Smišovič, to bude Šimko. Pre nikto musel poradiť tento človek. No, kto to bol, to nevieme. A bola to chyba samozrejme, ale ešte väčšia chyba bola, že nechali ten problém takto ovývať. Teda pani prezidentka. Ona v momente, keď to začalo, mala výrazť.
Sama od seba, hej?
No jasne, však na to má kompetenciu, na to má právo a nenahrávalo by sa potom v tej kauze tým Ficom a čo aj komu, však títo tak zneužili opäť, že to bolo hrozné, zneužili ten Mikuláš Zurinda.
Aj tento kritizoval. Mne ale príde vtipné, že Fico, ktorý hovorí stále o nejakom manipulovaní vyšetrovania, potom na výrok, ktorý de facto niekto môže považovať za nejakým tým spôsobom sa vmedzerovanie do toho vyšetrovania, zaujímania sa o živé kauzy, že on vlastne takéto niečo podporí, keď celú dobu hovoril, že je proti tomu.
A čo sa čudujete? Ficovi sa netreba čudovať, no. Ste povedali, že on hovoril o manipulovaní vyšetrovania. No manipulátor je Robert Fico. Však vieme o tom, že tie nahrávky boli zmanipulované.
Aj teda na inšpekcii a dokonca už aj sa ukázalo, že na prokuratúre.
No ale to Robert Fico vie, že sú zmanipulované. Musí teda vedieť. Áno, tak za intenzívnej pomoci krajskej prokuratúry, lebo tá je teda zaštepená, a za pomocou pána Žilinku, ktorý to dnes nedal vyšetrovať. Čo sa s tými nahrávkami robilo. On nám povedal, že však to tí policajti. No dobre, tak ale prečo sa to nevyšetruje? Takže tak, no.
A pak obvinení sú stále vyšetrovateľe, ktorých dva súdy už povedali, že nie je vôbec povedanie na nich.
Tak čo jasný súd, čo tu na súd hovorím, keď Fico povie, že sú dravnerí, tak sú dravnerí.
Zostaňme ešte na tej demokratickej časti spektra, potom sa pôjdeme k tým preferenčne vyšším
To
stranám.
pravda, Gauner je Gauner.
V Česku. Pracovali ste napríklad pre televíziu Nová a